The reality is, us humans, at least in my belief, are incredibly habitual creatures. We have to become conscious to ourselves because we're in our autopilot 95% of the day if we're not conscious, and that's going to be like the program. I mean, the computer analogy is, I think, the one that we all understand the most. That's going to be the program that we're running day after day after day. So without consciousness, there is no change.
If I'm in some triggering situation and I can see my stories, my ego is telling me, oh, that person's disrespecting you, this is where you kick and scream and yell, I'm able to stand in my awareness and make a new choice.
Top 10, I got a top 10. Got my motivation high for my top 10. Gotta learn from the wise women and men. All my life, like nah, 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 nah. For my top 10, top 10, top 10, nah, nah, nah. This one's for my top 10.
First thing that I suggest that even clients that I work with do is observe themselves, because the reality is, us humans, at least in my belief, are incredibly habitual creatures. From just our daily habits, the things we do first thing in the morning, the things we do last thing at night, to our thoughts become very habitual. We tend to think the same type of thought, and then because I believe that our thoughts trigger reactions, emotions in our environment, actual physiology changes, we tend to have the same experiences and in our bodies. We tend to feel the same way, and not always is that helpful. So first and foremost, anyone listening, observe themselves. Notice not only their behavioral habits, but tune into your mind, into the thoughts that are peppering through your day. For me, when items would go missing, like my brownie that I really wanted, it became not only do I not have enough for me, but the meaning that I assigned was I'm not considered. And that would open up a really deep wound. So when my partner's looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? It's a brownie, Nicole. I'll go get you another one. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, but inside I was like a little girl who was not being seen and was being told that there's not enough for me. And I mean, so that's where that pain was coming from when I was tearing around the apartment about my brownie. It wasn't about my brownie. And I think that's the way that, I mean, if we all look at ourselves and our patterns, and I'm always talking about developing self-observation to do that, all of our clues are there. Our past is present with us. And that's why we're stuck. And that's why we can't, the way I see it at least, that's why a lot of us struggle to move forward. And that's why I hear the word stuck probably more often than I hear any word spoken.
So how do people get unstuck?
First, I think consciousness. We have to become conscious to ourselves because we're in our autopilot 95% of the day if we're not conscious, and that's going to be like the program. I mean, the computer analogy is, I think, the one that we all understand the most. That's going to be the program that we're running day after day after day. So without consciousness, there is no change.
We are the only thing on this planet that we have control over. We don't have control over, as much as we want to, anyone or anything else in our environment. So like I said, the power of choice is so empowering, but it's also the reality. We are all we have. So it is on us and our responsibility to make the choices that best serve us. And the less we spend time trying to control everyone and everything around us, the more energy and space we're going to have to do that more internal work.
The reason I talk about a sitting practice, Lisa, is because it's a bit easier. This is a difficult skill, though, first and foremost. I mean, for a lot of us, life is distraction in a helpful way. If I'm focused outward on all of the things that I have to do, sometimes a lot of people, I was this person as well, I resisted having a sitting practice for a very long time because the act of sitting brought up in my mind and then in my feelings all of the discomfort that was below the surface. And I'm someone who was very productive throughout my whole life. So productivity became a distraction for me. Checking the next box kept me from sitting with myself in a way that was more emotionally comfortable for me. So a lot of people, I do think, struggle to sit. But what I believe that when consciousness, put it this way, becomes the most impactful is when we learn how to observe ourselves in our daily life. You know, getting a look on those behavioral habits. What does my day look like? Because I do work around nutrition, what do my eating choices look like? This is another area.
Suggest people journal this down?
Journaling is great. I mean, depending on whatever gets you looking, some people do a journal. And I think if you're doing some work around nutritional changes, writing down what your food choices look like, that I think can help us become a little more self-observational. Going inward, then observing our internal world throughout our day is also very difficult. So it means checking in with yourself throughout the day, noting first and foremost, where is my attention? right? And if it's internal, if I'm looking at my thoughts, what was going on? What was I thinking? And sometimes it just means being conscious, setting the intention, put it this way, to be conscious through the given day. So a tool I came up with that I think has been having a lot of success with people is what I call a future self journal. So it's the act of each day, instead of journaling about, oh, this is what I did or this is what I'm feeling, journaling about an intention to change. And I think the repetition of doing that daily helps us to then be a bit more conscious through our day, because it's not our autopilot yet. Our autopilot is that subconscious, is those old habits. So for a lot of us, we have to set the intention to be a bit more conscious and observe either my external world and what it looks like or my behaviors, and then being able to move that inward, that I call it my observational spotlight, and starting to look at, okay, what are the thoughts that I'm having that are coloring my choices through my day?
I am always a believer, and I explore this within myself a lot, how much is the past necessary? And I keep coming to the conclusion that it's necessary, that becoming self-observational, understanding, I think that developing through a mindfulness-based meditation practice is incredibly helpful, because it actually helps us to fire up our brain in a new way that then allows for self-observation throughout the day. Because I don't think there's no magic cushion, there's no magic anything. The way I see it, we can't do something once and then expect my day to look different magically because I've meditated in the morning. Yeah, there's some gains and some peace. I mean, a joke you made, like, oh, I meditate in the morning so I can, calm my mind. Yeah, we get a little residual, carry away from sitting and meditating. But if I'm not watching myself throughout the day, and if I don't train myself to watch myself throughout the day, to watch my patterns, to watch the thoughts that are causing those emotional reactions, and especially to see when I'm triggered, just when I'm having a big feeling about a current event. And typically the feeling is really big because it's about the meaning assigned to the event, the similarity of this now event based on my past experiences. And so there's always a reason why things are way bigger than they maybe ought to be logically in that moment. And then that's where we dive in and give ourselves some new, either releasing the emotional valve, soothing our own emotional wounds in that moment, not looking outside of anyone or anything else to make us feel better. At least that's the way that I view it.
A lot of us live very mindlessly. Some of us aren't even aware of the fact that there are literally an incessant internal dialogue going on. So awareness, tuning in to that internal world, is the hugest first, most important step. But then you're right. And then we need to question that world, because some of the things that we are saying to ourselves on a daily basis aren't accurate and aren't helpful. So to speak to your point, yes, that is kind of what we're talking about, looking into that world and questioning it, and then telling ourselves something new that would better serve our goals in life.
Intuition is our inner knowledge. It is our inner knowing, our inner being. It's that thing that's below kind of those conscious thoughts. So how do we connect with those? That is our mind-body connection. So when we're out of our thinking mind and we're literally connected to our body, that's when we can connect with our intuition. Two huge important concepts that I'm always talking about are presence and awareness. When we're in the moment, when we're not in our minds, when we're in our bodies, that's when we're going to be able to connect with our intuition. So how can we do this? 3 great practices. Those of you who follow me probably see me doing breath work. Breath work is essentially practice breathing. When we are practicing our breathing and literally paying attention to the fact that we're breathing, we are connected to our bodies. Yoga, stretching, huge mindful activities, huge presence when we are literally stretching our bodies. So touching your toes, feeling your body touch your toes, not thinking about, ow, this hurts. Literally feeling it in your body. And yoga. Whoever takes a yoga class has probably heard the instructions from the instructor is always telling you, connect with your breath, connect with your body. Huge way to connect with that intuition. And a third one is body scan. Essentially what body scan is, it's a meditative practice where we literally can lay down and feel our bodies. Go down from our heads to our toes, feeling where our bodies are tense. So for me, I always carry tension up here in my shoulders. So if I'm sitting here and I'm laying there and I'm focusing on my breathing, I will actually feel that tension in my shoulders. Practicing either of these 3 activities can be so helpful. Get us connected to our bodies, get us connected to our intuition, practice getting out of our thinking minds.
A lot about interdependence is the kind of term that I've been going back to a lot recently.
What does that mean?
essentially being, because we are social creatures as humans. We actually benefited quite greatly from having tribes, as we were evolving in terms of safety and division of labor. So as I see it, we need, quote unquote, little n need relationships.
Yes.
But I think what interdependence means to me is being able to be a self-reliant and resilient, a human, meeting all my physical, emotional needs separately, and then having that shared space of relationship.
I have never been a big fan, put it this way, of what I call the Band-Aid approach. Like you're saying, the touch and go.
Yeah.
Because especially when we're talking about emotions, which is the way I define them, emotions are energies. To speak to your point, we're receiving, we are an energetic body. I mean, the quantum field, quantum science is there. It exists, whether or not we want to believe it or not. It's a reality.
It's true.
Like you said, we're sending, we're receiving. So emotions are energies, right? So I was never a fan of a Band-Aid approach. I cope in the moment and get through it.
Yeah.
Because, and this is where the quantum comes in, the emotions don't go anywhere. And I mean, they can make us physically ill. They can keep us stuck emotionally. I mean, there's just so much. So I don't ever.
So many possibilities. Yeah.
I think to speak to your point, we're in agreement that I don't think touch and go actually really works unless we're getting the underlying, kind of cause of it. Then it's just a Band-Aid.
Absolutely.
The ego is whenever you hear yourself thinking or talking and you say the word I, whatever comes after I is a statement based in the ego. It's this conceptualization really of who I am, maybe of who others are in the world. Maybe it's a conceptualization of who and what the world is. It's a sort of self-definition. The reality being, it's only part of ourself. It is not who we actually are. Who we are is something that's called consciousness. It's the ability to observe this part of ourself. So how do we begin to break out of living life in ego? The first stage is what we're calling the lack of ego awareness. It's when we're unconscious. It's when many of us aren't even aware that we have this part in our mind called the ego. We just think that the definition that we've been operating around is who we are and is how things are in the world for us. We are often reactive. We feel very defensive when our stories are challenged. So a lot of times this looks like if I have a belief about the world and someone across from me has a counter belief about the world, I can often feel threatened by their belief being different from mine. Sometimes that looks like outer reactivity, arguing. A lot of emotions get touched when our sense of self, when our definition of self, our ego definition of self is challenged. So this is what we think of when we think of life being lived unconsciously before we awaken. So what are we awakening? We're awakening to the consciousness that is us, bringing us to stage 2, which is when we come to realize that we do have an idea of who we are. We do have a story about ourselves, others in our world, and the world at large. We are repeating that story, many of us, throughout our day, all day long. So this stage is when we come to the reality that we have an internal dialogue that is separate from who we are. Who are we? The witnesser of that endless story about ourselves throughout the day. So once we wake up and we see, this is the first opportunity we're seeing our thoughts. And what a lot of us are seeing is they're very repetitive and they tell ourselves the same narratives over and over again, usually based around a story of who we are. Once we've woken in that way, what we're waking is the consciousness. I am the conscious observer. That's who I am. The next stage we evolve into is what I'm calling the witness or consciousness. So what that allows us to do now is to hold ourselves in that awareness space. So when we're in the stage 2, we often are still reactive. We know we're telling ourselves stories when that person does that thing, but I still can't stop the reaction that follows. I either detach, dissociate, however I take care of myself, or I do something external. I scream, I yell, whatever. So we're still in that reactive state. So when we evolve to stage 3, we're able more and more to maintain that position as that conscious observer. So what we're evolving to is even if I'm in some triggering situation and I can see my stories, my ego is telling me, that person's disrespecting you, this is where you kick and scream and yell, I'm able to stand in my awareness and make a new choice. This is where I evolved to what we call responsiveness. So doesn't mean though that my story's not running, doesn't mean that I'm not compelled to kick and scream and yell and tell this person how wrong they are. I probably am. This just means I have more space. Now I'm able to say, well, you know what, while all that's great, ego, thank you, I'm going to respond in this new way. The fourth stage, and this is ultimately life goal in a sense that some of us, might be able to evolve into and not all of us. This is what we think of when we think of enlightenment, ego integration, where we are able to maintain the awareness that we are just consciousness, where we are less and less shifting back into the stories and into the reactivity. I lay these out in stages. However, it's not a sequential process. We don't check the box of 1 and then we don't evolve into 2. More often than not, once you evolve and you develop the habit of observing your thoughts, so what you'll start to find is you fluctuate between stages 2 and 3, where sometimes, no, I go right into ego reactivity, and other times I'm able to maintain that more responsive space. So none of this is sequential. Once we pass one stage, we're not forever gonna not go back. Sometimes we go back and forth between these stages. It's a constant evolution. But ego work is incredibly important because a lot of us are identifying with stories that are not who we are. We are quite literally such an expansive, conscious awareness that has choice in each and every moment. We just have to practice cultivating that choice.
Top 10.